and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I'm here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about any exciting bookish things that have gone on during the week. This is going to be an interesting Friday Reads video. There's not a whole lot to talk about before we get into the Friday Reads, where I finished 2 books and have 2 books on the go at the moment, so I'm not going to put a timestamp down below. As I said, the things to talk about before we get into that are pretty quick. The first thing is just thank you. Everybody was very nice and supportive of me taking just like a couple of days off from filming a video after last week's barn burner, where I had to film a video every single day last week and try to turn it around very quickly. And of course that happened because the National Book Award announced its finalists, and I did videos for the fiction category and the translated fiction category. I also did a reaction to the Nobel Prize for Literature's winner. You can find all of those videos in the links down below if you haven't seen them, would like to catch up, or any of that. So this week I only posted a short in the time between last Friday Reads and this. And that I felt pretty good. Hopefully I feel a little rejuvenated. I have no idea what videos I might post next week. We are getting close to the end of the month, which means book haul is coming, but I'll figure something out. I'll have at least one video out between this video and the next Friday Reads. So thank you for your patience and understanding. It felt very good for me to take the break, so I appreciate it. The next thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the Friday Reads portion of the video is the t-shirt that I'm wearing, which unfortunately you can't see right now. So I'm going to stand up so I can show it to you. This is a t-shirt that comes from Fabulosa Books, which is in San Francisco in the Castro. You can probably guess. I love this shirt. I am so happy to have it. It was a gift from a good friend. And I have not been to Fabulosa Books, but it is on my bookstore bucket list. Yes, I have one of those. And I haven't been to San Francisco in a very long time. I can't remember exactly when I went last. It was somewhere in the mid-aughts. So somewhere around like 2005 or 2006, possibly even 2007. And that was just for a quick weekend trip with my father, who was on a business trip, so I didn't even really get to do anything. But I lived in San Francisco when I was in high school, and I was very regimented in my book. There was a bookstore very close to where I lived in San Francisco at the time, and there was a bookstore close to my high school. And it was sort of not on the way, but it was close enough between my high school and where I was working that I could go visit that. And that was Books Inc. And Books Inc. actually just got purchased, I think, by Barnes & Noble, so it's sort of in the same place as Tattered Cover now, but it does still exist. So that's the bookstore that I would always go to, and for that reason, I've never been to Green Light. I did go to City Lights, and or the famous one that is involved with like Jack Kerouac. I'm completely blanking on the name right now, but I have been to that one as well. But there are a lot of bookstores in San Francisco that I haven't been to. Fabulosa did not exist at that time, but it is on my list of stores I'd like to go to. So someday, if Joel and I get back to San Francisco, this is definitely going to be in the cards, and I would love to visit it. And in the meantime, I'm just, once again, look at how cool this shirt is. This is now the second time I have worn it since it arrived a week ago, because Monday's laundry day here. So I wore it last weekend, watched it on Monday, and then have held on to it for this Friday Reads video because I love it so much. And thank you to the good friend who sent it to me. So let's get into the Friday Reads portion of the video. As I said, I finished 2 books this week. Both of them were on audio, which is a little bit surprising for me. You know, I feel like my preferred format for reading fluctuates a fair amount. And recently, I've had a bit of a more difficult time paying attention to audiobooks than I have print books. So my graph on the format is usually pretty 50-50 between print books and audiobooks. This year, it's definitely skews toward the print side of things. But over the last week or so, I've noticed I'm just having a much easier time listening to audiobooks. So it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues, if by the end of the year things have sort of equalized and we end up back in that sort of 50-50 position. But that's sort of where I am at right now. The first audiobook that I finished over this past week was The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie. I had started this one on audio. If you remember, I had finished The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is a book that a lot of people regard as one of Agatha Christie's best, if not the best. And I enjoyed it. The ending had been spoiled for me, but it was fun to see her putting all of the pieces together so that the ending makes sense if you reread it. And that was fun. And it sort of got me in a bit of an Agatha Christie headspace. So I picked up the Murder at the Vicarage. It was available on Libby. So I just thought, you know what? I'm going to dive right in. And it's an interesting Miss Marple book because, if you follow along, you know, I prefer Miss Marple to Hercule Poirot. But this is a very interesting Miss Marple book because she's not in it all that much. She's really a very peripheral character. Obviously, she's a very... a character who's very integral to the plot because she solves it. She solves the murder. That's why she becomes such a recurring character. But you almost wouldn't guess that this is the first book about her that's going to be in a series. I almost wonder maybe Agatha Christie didn't know that there was going to be a series of books about this character. And as she wrote or finished the book, something about Miss Marple endeared her, so she wrote more and more, and it became a thing. But yeah, she's not in the book a lot. So it's interesting as an introduction to Miss Marple. The premise of it is that there, look at the title. There's a murder. Go figure. At the vicarage. Go figure. And the vicar, or the man who lives there is Clement. He's a pastor. He lives there with his wife and their nephew, and they have a maid. And there is a man in town who is regarded as a bully. And you spend a fair amount of time in the opening getting to know how people think about this man, the people in the village, because the village itself is very important to the murder at the vicarage. This is, the whole thing is that there are the idea of gossip in a small town. And the way people talk about what other people are doing and notice what other people are doing. One reason that Miss Marple becomes so important to the case is that she pays attention to everything that's going on around her. She often sees things, and she happens to live next door to the vicarage where the murder takes place. So she is aware of the comes and goings of everyone at that house and in the neighborhood. And there are policemen who don't take the gossip, especially of older women, seriously, even though Clement, the pastor, will repeatedly tell them, if Miss Marple says it, you can trust that it's accurate. And it's a very interesting book for that. It's not Agatha Christie's best mystery. And it is a little disappointing that Miss Marple is such a peripheral character for such a long stretch of the book. But I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad especially because I would like to read more Miss Marple books. I had looked, and the second book in the series, I'm forgetting what the title of it, is on Libby, but it wasn't currently available, and that's okay because I'm having one of those situations where all of my Libby holds keep coming available at one time, and it's a lot to manage. So once I get a gap, I do have another book that I would like to do on audio, and I might try to fit that in. But, when I'm ready for it, the next book in the series is on Libby and should be fairly easy to get. I also, as I mentioned, talking to Joel when we did our wrap up for the month of September and talked about our October plans. In the month of October, I would really like to listen to the audio of Dolores Claiborne. That was also not available, but as I said, that's okay because I have this backup of books that have suddenly become available. So I would still like to get to that one. It was not immediately available, but it should be available soon because I did manage to put a hold on that one. So Murder at the Vicarage was the first audiobook that I finished this week. Then, because Monday is sort of a holiday in the United States. It's this weird thing. A lot of people still call it Columbus Day. I prefer to think of it as Indigenous Peoples Day. But Joel and I ended up kind of having time off. He did have to stop in and do some work, but we decided to take a road trip to Bozeman, which is about a 3-hour drive from where we live. And Bozeman has a really great downtown. It is, a lot of Montana has been growing very significantly over the last few years, especially since the pandemic. Bozeman in particular, it's not the biggest town in Montana by a long stretch, but, Missoula, where I live, and Bozeman are the college towns. So they tend to be a little more liberal. And there's a lot more going on. So it's not entirely surprising, but Bozeman has better skiing access than Missoula. So that's probably why it has grown so much. But they have a really great downtown, which has a really great bookstore called Country Bookshelf. We went there. As I said in the short that I did this week, I had intended to do a video about the store and turn that into a short. And instead, the short turned into me telling you that I went to the Country Bookshelf and how I forgot to get any footage at all. It happens. I get so excited when I go into a bookstore that I just lose all sense of thinking about having content that I can repurpose for social media later. It's not a bad thing. I'm not upset about it, but it did make it a little more of a scramble to come up with something that I could use as a short this week. So anyway, and we also went to Isle of Books, which is a great used bookstore in Bozeman. We actually met the owner and she was very friendly. So we had a whole day of it, but because it's about a 3-hour drive to Bozeman and a 3-hour drive home, we started listening to an audiobook. And we looked at a bunch of options for something that Joel and I could listen to together. And immediately, our thoughts pretty quickly turned to Abby Jimenez. Now, there are 2 published Abby Jimenez books that I have not read yet. There's only one that Joel has not read. So I still need to read the Happy Ever After playlist, which is the second book in the original trilogy that Abby Jimenez wrote. But Joel has already listened to that one. So he wanted to say, why don't we just, listen to the Happy Ever After playlist and then you'll be caught up to where I am. And I said, why don't we just listen to the one you haven't listened to and then it'll be new for both of us. And Joel said, well, then you'll be out of order. And my point was, I've been out of order on the Abby Jimenez books since my very first one, because Just for the Summer is a sequel, but it was the first book of hers that I read. So Life's Too Short is the book that we decided to do on this trip. Now, because it's about an 8.5, 9-hour audiobook, and we had about 6 hours of driving time, we had to finish once we got back. When we had dinner Monday night, after getting home, we listened to a little bit more. So we got about another half hour at that point, which meant that we only had about 45 minutes at that point. So the following day, we took a drive with Teddy because the weather was awful. I love fall, and we had gotten something of a semblance of fall in Montana, but this week it feels like we've tipped into it feeling like winter. So really, fall in Montana is sort of like the end of September and the first half of October. That's kind of how it's gone in recent years. So the weather was awful on Monday. It was freezing cold. It was wet and rainy. So we weren't able to walk Teddy. So we took a drive and we finished it. And, the trend continues. Abby Jimenez has not missed for me at all. Every single book of hers that I have read, I have liked. I could rank them. It would be kind of difficult to rank at this point, just because there have been a lot. But I could rank them. But, they're all winners in my book. She's a very consistent cinnamon bun author. And I think one of the things that both Joel and I like about her is that she writes books that are a good balance of serious content, like relatable life things that happen in the lives of the protagonists, and that cinnamon bun, fluffy, great romance and connection between those characters that you sometimes crave if you're at all like me or Joel. She's just very good at that. So the premise of this book is that you have Vanessa Price, who lives in an apartment building in a studio, and she doesn't really care about the size of her apartment because she is not home all that much. She travels the world. She is a social media person. She's like a travel vlogger. So she has a YouTube channel that is huge. Like, she makes her money off of YouTube, unlike, me, who has a day job. So that's what she does. She meets Adrian, who is a lawyer who lives next to her and actually who owns the building that they live in. She meets him one night because she has recently taken care of a baby. Like, she has assumed care of this baby. She at first introduces the baby as a foster kid, but it turns out that this is actually her sister's kid. Her sister is struggling with addiction issues. So Vanessa has taken the baby to make sure that she is properly cared for while she tries to get her sister into rehab and get her sober. There are all kinds of issues with Vanessa's family. Her father has become a hoarder. Her mother died when she was very young. Her mother had ALS, and did not die of ALS directly. There is a fly that is buzzing all over the place. I don't know if you can see it. I'm trying to ignore it, but it's at the point where I feel like I should acknowledge it. Anyway, her mother died not of ALS directly, but in a car accident because she sort of lost control of the vehicle. Her sister died of ALS. So neither her mother nor her sister nor her grandmother made it past the age of 30. And Vanessa is sort of looking at her 29th birthday, and she believes that she is probably going to die young as well, just like her mother, grandmother, sister. A lot of the evidence kind of points to that. So that's part of why she does this traveling for this channel that she has. She is trying to live life to its fullest while she can, and there's a lot of interest about that. Then Adrian is someone who I started talking about how they met, and I got sidetracked into all of this other stuff. Anyway, he hears a baby crying in the neighboring apartment, so he goes over and ends up helping out with the baby. And as they meet and they talk, so he's a lawyer. He is very good at his job. His life revolves around work. And he is very measured and even and prepared. So there's a bit of that opposites attract thing. He's very predictable, very regimented and safe. And she is very spontaneous and all of that other stuff. But they form a very quick friendship. He helps her take care of this baby. And as in every Abby Jimenez book that I have read, at this point I only have one before her next book gets published next year, there's always instant chemistry between the protagonists. And I love how that plays out. And this book is really no different at all. So if you love Abby Jimenez, odds are you probably already read this. But if you have been thinking of dipping a toe in, I would just say this is like another hit. I can't tell you where to start with Abby Jimenez books. If you're interested, I started with Just for the Summer, but as I said, that is a sequel. So I don't think you have to go in order just because I didn't, and I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of these books. But, I clearly started with the first Miss Marple book on this reread, and it's interesting. And actually, I didn't mention this, but on The Murder at the Vicarage, I was trying to game the system. So I did read The Murder at the Vicarage when I was a teenager, but I don't remember anything about it. So it was fun to go back. And one of the things I like about Agatha Christie is that she sort of uses your expectations against you. So this isn't really a spoiler, but like I was trying to game it. I was thinking about who would have done it and who would make sense in it, but I was thinking of in traditional mystery tropes. And at the end of the book, there's like a throwaway comment where somebody said, I kind of thought that this would happen because that would be really exciting. And Miss Marple basically says, well, yes, that is the thing that would be exciting, but that's not how real life works. So she kind of immediately says, I know that that's what you thought was going to happen. And I fell for it. Anyway, so those are the two books that I finished this week. What else am I doing? Let's start by what I've been doing in print. Now, I'm slowly working my way through Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier still. This is the book that I was reading in my last Friday Reads, and I'm still not even halfway through. I'm on page 152 out of, I think it's just over 400 pages. So the slow pace that I'm going at has nothing to do with the book. This is really fitting the mood I'm in right now. It's fitting the sort of fall into winter spooky season vibe, because I'm not somebody who reads a lot of horror books. So this is like my version of spooky reading. And it is a classic tale of romantic suspense, as it says on the cover of this edition that I have. So that's kind of where I am. I think if you haven't read Rebecca, I do get some pretty solid Jane Eyre vibes off of this. And I haven't read Wuthering Heights, but I imagine, it's a Bronte connection. So I imagine you would enjoy this book. It is very good. So I have been a fan of the movie, as I said in my last video, for a very long time. And I'm really looking forward to rewatching the movie because I have not watched it in a long time. So once I'm done, I would like to watch the movie again. The Hitchcock movie, not the recent adaptation. I just want to be clear. The Hitchcock movie that won Best Picture at the Oscars. That's the one that I would like to watch. So if you're unfamiliar, Rebecca is about a woman who goes unnamed through the entire book. She is young. She's very insecure. She's a good person. Like everybody, she can be prone to have a little temper tantrums. When she does get angry about something, it does kind of come out in a little bit of a childish way. And that's part of how she seems a bit naive and a bit childish compared to everyone else. But that's by design, because she is sort of meant to be insecure about her surroundings, uncertain of everything going on around her. And it doesn't come off as icky or like Daphne du Maurier is writing down or punching down. It feels like a real character because, a lot of people can be naive and a little bit childish when they're in their early 20s. I was very naive. I didn't really understand how the world worked. It took me a long time to sort of catch up to that. So hopefully I'm there at least. But she is working as a companion for a rich woman that she doesn't like and who isn't very kind to her. They meet Maxim de Winter at lunch one day, and the woman that our protagonist is acting as a companion for knows who Maxim de Winter is, and that he has this very fancy home called Manderley, and that his wife, Rebecca, had died about a year ago. She drowned in the bay near the home. And she tells our protagonist these details, and then fortunately for our protagonist, the woman, Mrs. Van Hopper, falls ill. She gets the flu. So she is ordered on bed rest for about a week or 2 weeks. And during that time period, our protagonist gets to know Maxim de Winter. They start going on rides together in Monte Carlo, and they form a bit of a friendship that could be more. And when Mrs. Van Hopper decides that they're going to leave rather suddenly, our protagonist goes to say goodbye to Maxim de Winter. He proposes. So they get married a little bit spur of the moment, but they have spent a fair amount of time together. I mean, a fair amount of time. As much time as you can spend together in a month of time. So they go off on a honeymoon, and then when they come back, they go to Manderley, his home. And I think this is where the aspects of the protagonist being young and a little naive and insecure come in. She is not as high class, and when I say high class, I mean wealthy, as Maxim de Winter. So she's sort of unprepared for this grand life that he leads. She's unprepared to be the leader of the household, because as the wife, she is the person who is supposed to run the household, and she doesn't really know or understand everything that goes into it. So having a character be sort of young, insecure, and naive exacerbates all of these problems because, if she was more confident, she could figure these things out. But because she is very timid, she struggles to adapt to the way things are and what her new role is. And in addition to that, she is learning a bit about Maxim de Winter, her husband, and what happened to Rebecca and what Rebecca's life is like or was like. And she can't help but feel that she is living in Rebecca's shadow, especially since she is constantly compared to Rebecca. She goes and picks flowers, and when she gets a vase, she wants to put them on a specific table, but the butler tells her, the previous Mrs. De Winter used this table. So, and again, because she's a timid and naive and insecure person, she'll be like, oh, okay, well, we'll just use that table. Her rooms, her furniture are all Rebecca's. She spends most of the day in a morning room that was designed by Rebecca. So, and the more she learns about things, the more sort of mysterious it is as well. So I can't wait to finish this book. But I'm just taking my time as I go through it. And one thing that is on my mind a lot right now is just managing life and having a channel. So taking a couple of days off of filming a video this week was a way of helping me keep this fun, because, things are supposed to be fun when you're doing something in addition to like your full-time job and everything like that. So I'm also spending a lot of time thinking about how I read and how my reading has changed. And I wasn't going to get into it here, but let's talk about it a little bit. Because it is something that I'm thinking about and I don't have an answer right now. But when I was looking at the books that I have read this year, it occurred to me, I have read a great deal more current literature, like books that have been published this year. And that's not uncommon, but I've read more books that are new and significantly less backlist titles, things that were published a couple of years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. And I usually have a much better mix of things. And so having a YouTube channel about books has sort of changed the way I read, because it feels like the newer books are the things that more people are talking about and interested in, because that's what's current, that's what's new and exciting for everyone. So it's easier to get a conversation going with people if they're familiar with what you're reading and have heard from other people who have read it, or maybe you're thinking of reading it themselves. So without really realizing it, I started leaning in that direction. And, it's probably no mistake then that this happened to be a year in which I started reading the Booker Prize long list, even though that's not something I had ever set out to do. So I want to next year get back to more of a mix. Frontlist titles, sure, of course, because I'm interested in new books and what's going on in publishing now, but more backlist titles as well. And I started the year out doing really well on my Pulitzer project, and now over the summer I've gotten completely sidetracked from it because I'm reading too many new books, and I feel like I need to keep up with all of the new books that keep coming out. And then at the same time, I have also noticed that as I have done book haul revisits, and as I made more of a focus in them to try to figure out what books I'm unhauling without reading, and trying to measure like how many of the books in my book hauls I have read, and I added metrics even though they're informal, I have started thinking about those things. So a lot of things that I have gotten from publishers, like advanced readers copies, I have actually thought, well, I'd really like to read this, but if I read this book, it'll actually count toward my percentage for my book haul revisit next year. So maybe I should focus on this, because since this was sent to me by a publisher, it doesn't count toward that. So my reading has sort of skewed into not being as much about what I would like to read and being a little bit more about what other people might be interested in, what other people might be reading right now, so we can have that conversation, because having that conversation is why it was a big reason behind me starting this channel, at least. So the other thing is I used to read a lot of short stories and plays, and I've been building up my play collection again. And I just had a conversation with someone 2 or 3 weeks ago at a dinner party, and he mentioned that he mainly reads short stories. And we had a whole conversation about his favorite short story collections and all of that. And I was telling him, it's like, I love short stories, but I don't tend to read them that much anymore. And he, of course, he asked why. And I hadn't really thought that there was a specific reason, but I think part of the reality of it is they aren't something that a whole lot of people who watch my channel like. So I feel like if I read a short story collection, I'm not really going to be able to talk about it with other people. So I have all of these short story collections that I want to read, and I've been putting them off. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do think next year I want to pick and choose what I read a little bit more for me. And the sort of side part of that conversation is that a lot of the time, because I have a channel, because I do a Friday Reads video every week, I feel like I need to have finished things. Now, obviously, the pressure was off this week because I finished 2 audiobooks, but I feel like I need to go quickly through books, and I have to sort of keep that pace going. And taking my time with Rebecca has actually felt good. So I'm trying not to pressure myself to get through it quickly, even though there are a lot of books that I would like to get to. So that's I guess the big conversation for this Friday Reads video. I didn't know what the main focus was going to be. I thought it was just going to be like, oh, this is just going to be like a standard Friday Reads video. But we actually got to a conversation point. Look at that. How BookTube has changed my reading and what I might need to do about it. So after I finished The Murder at the Vicarage, after I finished Life's Too Short with Joel, I started having that Libby back up. So like 3 different audiobooks became available on Libby at once. And one of those was Brooklyn by Colm Tabine. I've wanted to read this for a long time, but I wanted to read The Blackwater Lightship by Colm Tabine first, since I had never read one of his books before. Well, I read The Blackwater Lightship in June for Pride Month, and for that reason, I am now free to finally read Brooklyn. Now, I am, I think, 20% into the audio on the day that I'm filming this, which is Friday. And I'm really enjoying it. Now, I did see the movie, and I've talked about this before, but I saw the movie with my mother, and she got offended by the movie. And I don't think there was cause for it, but so if you follow along, you probably know my mother's a first-generation American. Her parents were Italian, so they came over, and it's sort of impossible to remove that first-generation American thing from my mother, especially since she's the oldest of her siblings. So a lot of the struggles to adapt to American culture played out in her life. And even less so for every sibling that came since and after. And I'm the generation that is fully adapted into the United States and is sort of moving away from. So these are just things that we're all interested in. The only reason that's important is that there was an Italian immigrant character in the movie, which is the only thing I remember about the movie. And my mother thought it was offensive that she thought he was portrayed to be an idiot. She's like, well, they're making the Italian an idiot, and that's rude. And I was like, I don't think they're making him an idiot. I think he has sacrificed his own education to give his siblings a better chance. That's actually a noble thing. And my mom's like, no, they made him an idiot. So that's all I remember about the movie. So this is another case where once I'm done with the book, I would like to rewatch the movie because I think it'll be a totally different experience watching without my mother. But this is about an Irish girl, not actually an Italian girl, an Irish girl, which makes sense because Colm Tabine is Irish. So her name is Ailish, and it's after World War II. So I think we're into the 1950s. And she is living with her mother and her older sister. Her brothers have moved to England where they have gotten like factory jobs, and her father has died. And she is studying to like bookkeeping so she can get an office job, but there's no work that she can find. She gets a job in a store the woman just doesn't treat her very well. So she eventually, at the sort of behest, the sort of calm, passive-aggressive behest of her mother and sister, she goes to the United States. And I'm at the point of the book where she has been on the boat leaving Ireland to get to the United States, and she's just about to arrive there. And it's a really beautiful story about her family, about the experience of immigration, about trying to make it in a country where there aren't that many opportunities for you. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. This is a really endlessly fascinating book. It works on like multiple levels, I think. And it's a good story. Like, you could read this book and not really think into any of the themes or the larger meanings behind it, and it would be a good story. But there's a lot more, because Colm Tóibín is a great writer. There's a lot more to think about human nature, connections. I mean, even the fact that she doesn't feel like she can tell her mother and her sister that she doesn't want to go. And the idea that maybe it would have been better if her sister had had the opportunity to go. And the experience of getting into a new country, and people have told her, like, her brother tells her that when he first went to England, he was in a state of despair and wanting to go home for a long time at the beginning. I can't remember exactly how long, but, you know, and it's hard to tell, like, because I have this connection to my mother, who is a first-generation American, and my grandparents who immigrated over. Is this just resonating very strongly with me because it's a lot of things that I witnessed in their lives? Or is it just Colm Tóibín? And it's probably Colm Tóibín, but I'm sure there's an element of it resonating so much because of my family. So really looking forward to getting further into that book. And we can leave it there. Oh, Teddy just wandered in and fell asleep. Let's see if we can get him for you. There he is, just sleeping peacefully. So that's what I've been up to this week. I also watched some movies. We went and saw The Smashing Machine in theaters. I was actually surprised by how much I liked it. Who knows? And I saw In Old Arizona, which won Warner Baxter the second ever Best Actor prize. It's just okay. And he was good. I think if I were ranking the best actors, he'd be toward the middle of the pack, or maybe even toward the low end of the middle. But that's what I've watched this week. That's what I've been reading this week, and all of that stuff. I'd love to hear what you've been up to, reading, watching, all of that stuff. Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.